Nå skrur vi på disse. Men vi kan mute dem.
Hello, hello, hello. It's not working now.
We have to
Okay.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this event with prominent visitors from human rights organizations in Russia, OVD-Info and Memorial. Every year, 25th of November, on the International Day of the Elimination of Gender-Based Violence, the campaign 16 Days of Activism kicks off all over the world. For 16 days, human rights organizations, the women rights and LGBTIQ movement, activists and human rights defenders do their utmost to generate attention to the endemic gender-based violence that affects women and girls, as well as trans people, men and boys, globally. For us in the NHC, the campaign is on one hand something we look forward to, because we see so much of the great work and bravery of our partners gaining the attention that they absolutely do deserve. But for every year that passes, we see the trends that keep us more vigilant. Public manifestations are attacked, activists are arrested, hate speech flourishes. Because at the same time as the women's rights movement grows stronger and more resilient, we are witnessing a global backlash against gender equality. The backlash targets human rights defenders, lawyers, women in politics and academia, journalists, anyone speaking up against human rights abuse based on gender. It pushes back against comprehensive sexuality education in schools, women's reproductive health, protection from domestic violence, and women political participation. In Ukraine, sexual crimes are committed against Ukrainian women as part of warfare, adding to the acts of war crimes. This as well has another side. Mentally damaged Russian combatants return home, and domestic violence in Russia is soaring. There is a lot to do. Devastating global statistics state that every 10th minute a woman or girl is killed by a partner or family member. 1 out of 3 women fall victim to violence during their lifetime. We know that only 14% of women are currently living in a country with any robust protection from domestic violence. Being part of the human rights movement and working with the people who care to speak up, we also see how women at the forefront in politics and democracy movements are targeted with both physical and psychological violence. Women parliamentarians, journalists, human rights defenders are attacked, threatened, imprisoned, and some even killed. We work and cooperate with many of these and have first-hand information. To honor their work, we have therefore chosen to make NHC's 16 Days of Activism campaign to be about women political prisoners in 2025. All political prisoners suffer, but still it is a fact that women prisoners have additional risks connected to their health and the possibility for sexual assault. Maintaining focus on their situation is of crucial importance to improve and end their incarceration. In our campaign, we have made a calendar telling the stories of 12 brave women now in prison. This calendar is on sale here and online on our website. In this calendar, we present Azerbaijani journalists from Abzas Media, Elena Gazimova, Nargis Absalomova, and Sevinch Vagufgizi, risking 12 years in prison for their work to expose corruption in Azerbaijan. And we tell the story of 18-year-old medical student Daria Kazareva from Russia, risking 5 years of posting in social media against Russia's invasion in Ukraine. We have Mina Özderzen, convicted of 18 years of prison after the Gezi protests in Turkey. And Maria Kolesnikova from Belarus, who got 11 years in prison for being part of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya's election campaign and is currently serving her sentence in a critical health condition. Our goal is that by the end of the year, next calendar year, all our campaign laureates will celebrate New Year's Eve out of prison. We are deeply committed to fighting gender-based violence, not only throughout these 16 days, but all year around. And we are very proud to present the speakers today, talking about the situation, particularly in Russia. Russia has been at the forefront of the backlash on gender equality, disguising it as a fight for traditional family values, effectively discriminating, decriminalizing domestic violence. And the situation for human rights defenders, journalists and oppositionists is getting worse by the minute. Therefore, we are particularly grateful for the work done by the speakers you are listening to now for the next hour. Thank you for that, and the floor is yours. I leave the word to Inna, who will lead the discussions.
Okay, thank you, Berit, and welcome to our event. I would like to start with some practical information. We have slightly changed our program, so I will be moderating the conversation today. My name is Inna Sangadjiyeva. I am the Director of Europe and Central Asia Department of the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. And as Berit said, we have a quite prominent panel today. I would like to present to you our guests, and I would like to start with Elena Lipatova from OVD-Info, and also congratulate OVD-Info, the prominent human rights organization from Russia, with their birthday, which is today. 13 years ago, the organization started to monitor the situation in Russia, monitoring still in very difficult situation. So Elena Lipatova is advocacy specialist and OVD-Info and human rights lawyer. So you will be talking about the situation for for women political prisoners' health in Russia, and we also have exhibition. You will also maybe talk about it later. And Tamila Imanova from Human Rights Memorial, lawyer, human rights lawyer, and you also have been working in this organization, which also a nominee from Nobel Peace Prize. Welcome to us. We are very proud to be a partner for Memorial for many, many years. I would say maybe more than 30 years ago. So, and you will be talking about the situation for assessment of gender-based violence in the case of former ICC member's wife, to present an example. And Vanessa Kogan. Vanessa, we have been knowing each other for many years. You have been director for Stitching Justice Initiative previously, and now you represent a Berlin-based non-profit organization working on protecting civic space in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Welcome to us, and you will be talking about the situation, especially in the North Caucasus. But I will start to say that I myself also from Russia, and I grew up in Kalmykia, and with understanding that violence is something normal. It has been a kind of normality to see and to accept that both in family it is okay that there is a violence, and it is, of course, it's quite for me personally, it has been a change when I came to Norway. And here I also want to introduce my colleague Mina Skauen, who is our senior advisor for equal rights and responsible for our work for equal rights and LGBT issues, because again, for me personally, to meet you, Mina, and grow up in understanding what is important, why it is important to focus on the situation for women, and you actually learned me quite a lot through our collaboration and friendship, and so we will also have a talk and discussion afterwards on how Norwegian Helsinki Committee and international community can work together with on issues inside Russia. But first, all of you except Mina will have 7 minutes to present your main topic of our issue theme today. So, and I would start with Vanessa. Again, I think we should first start with the general approach on the situation with women's rights. Yesterday, a consensus for independent women organization from Russia made a report for the situation inside Russia, which says that that the scale of violence against women have been growing, and 2,284 women has been killed during 2002 and 2003, and it is a quite concerning situation now. Can you you have been working with women's rights in Russia for many years, and what are your could you please start saying some more general view of yours? How do you see the situation right now? Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Ina, for the introduction, and it's great to be back here at the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. You presented the statistics, Ina, from this report, and of course it's worth mentioning, of course, that Russia keeps no official statistics on domestic violence. So, although that's been one of the recommendations from the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women for many years, Russia still has no official statistics on domestic violence. So the figures that you presented here are the result of, I'm sure, painstaking research by civil society, essentially to analyze court decisions on particular articles of the criminal code, for example, murder or murder in the state of affect, which is, those would be the two most relevant articles. And from there to try and glean some statistics on the number of women killed by domestic violence in Russia per year. And I would imagine that, in fact, the number is higher because, again, analyzing court decisions takes a lot of time, and my guess would be that not all of them could be analyzed. So I would assume that the number is actually higher. And it's not surprising. I mean, since 2020, really, with the outbreak of the COVID pandemic, civil society organizations had documented, I think, at least a 60% increase in domestic violence against women, and there were efforts to, again, try to table domestic violence legislation, but the attitude of the government was that, well, we have a lot on our hands right now. We'll return to the issue when COVID is over. And indeed, again, you mentioned the decriminalization of domestic violence, which is actually the decriminalization of battery, and the Russian authorities like to use this to say that if you look at the statistics on battery, there are actually many fewer criminal offenses of battery, and therefore domestic violence has gone down, but it's really just because it was reclassified as an administrative offense. And repeat battery, in order to be classified as a criminal offense, has to happen within 1 year of the first offense. So if it happens after, then it's simply another administrative offense. And for that reason, often in Russia, we used to say that, when I still worked there, that you get one free beating a year, essentially. Unfortunately, I would say the momentum for for introducing domestic violence legislation has dramatically gone down since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So, there was prior to 2022, and with some of the European Court of Human Rights cases that had been litigated on domestic violence against Russia, where European Court of Human Rights, also the UN CEDAW committee had basically obliged Russia to implement domestic violence legislation, and there was quite productive discussion around potential legislative initiatives, but I think that that has faded, and the possibility of getting effective domestic violence legislation is farther away than ever, unfortunately. I know you wanted me to address the situation in the North Caucasus. Of course, there's also domestic violence, and not only domestic violence, but also a raft of harmful traditional practices against women that have been resurgent since the 90s, and particularly enforced particularly brutally in Chechnya, where Ramzan Kadyrov is known as authoritarian leader who has silenced all his critics, and he's very well known for that, of course, but less well known as someone who has dramatically affected, for the worse, the situation with women's rights in the region. Again, I think it's really a testament to civil society that these issues, so the domestic violence in the North Caucasus and harmful traditional practices, and by that I mean things like honor-based violence, bride kidnapping, early marriages, and even female genital mutilation, that they've even entered into the lexicon, because human rights organizations have done a lot to document these abuses and bring them to light, and then even in some particular cases to litigate them, and that's because it was suddenly acceptable to speak about them, and when it becomes acceptable to speak about them, then people actually come forward and are more ready to make complaints. So one particular case, for example, in the North Caucasus on domestic violence, one of the first cases that was ever litigated concerned a woman in Ingushetia, Maram Aliyeva, who essentially disappeared, but the last that she was seen was in her home, where she was being threatened by her husband, beaten up, and then after that she just disappeared. And she had been making complaints to the authorities for many, many years about violence, and eventually her sister brought forward a complaint and received state protection measures to bring the complaint forward, but was still so hounded by her brother-in-law's relatives that she had to flee Russia, and she received asylum in a European country. To return to the issue of harmful traditional practices, as I mentioned, there were documentation efforts by civil society, for example, on the practice of female genital mutilation, where it was estimated that approximately 1,200 girls per year, particularly in Dagestan, undergo this procedure before the age of 3. On honor-based violence, over 100 cases were documented between 2012 and 2018, based on a series of interviews with local respondents, and also an analysis of court decisions that related to honor-based violence. And certain litigation on these issues followed. So there was a case concerning bride kidnapping that went to the European Court of Human Rights, and also even a case following the reports on FGM on a case where a young girl in Ingushetia was taken to a clinic, actually by her father, and subjected to FGM in a medical setting. And this case was taken in Ingushetia locally, and the doctor in charge of the procedure was actually convicted of causing minor harm to health and fined around the equivalent of 500 USD. So that gives you an idea of the government's response to the issue. This was in 2018. The last area, though, that I want to focus on for the North Caucasus, again, where there's been a huge effort, really a systematic effort on behalf of women to enforce their rights, has to do with enforcing their right to bring up their children and participate in their upbringing. So customary laws in the North Caucasus essentially allow that a child can have many mothers but only ever has one father. So when a a woman has, when a woman is widowed or divorces her husband, then essentially she has no right whatsoever to participate in the upbringing of her children. And there's been a systematic effort for women to go first to Russian courts to enforce their rights to custody and to being involved in bringing up their children, and then also at the European Court of Human Rights. And the dynamic in those cases showed that, in fact, Russian law was at one point very helpful in and really standing on the side of women in terms of their ability to enforce their custody rights. Unfortunately, when it came to the enforcement, there were many, many other obstacles in women's way, and it was, also down to systemic discrimination and new initiatives, again, by Kadyrov, for example, a family reunification initiative that he started in 2017 that essentially forced public authorities to keep children with the father's families. And this systemic discrimination was also recognized in a case at the European Court for Human Rights. But I know that those efforts are continuing today. I would also like to, and I'll end with this actually, on the situation with evacuations of victims of violence from the North Caucasus. So, and it's also something that touches on the community here in the European Union and in Norway. So, with the situation being as it is, very, very high levels of violence and also reprisals against victims who choose to speak out, and also very limited number of shelters for women in Russia who are subjected to violence, in particular in the North Caucasus, a very, very, could say, strong desire to ensure that there's no reputational damage. This is particularly true for Chechnya, so there should be no public criticism of the regime. If a woman leaves her family and speaks out that, please don't look for me, I've made this decision of my own accord, I'm being subjected to violence, please don't come get me, then often what will happen is that the woman is forcibly returned with the help of state security forces, regional security forces who work with the woman's family to ensure that she's brought home. And this happened in several cases that my previous organization litigated, and again to enlarge the scope of the problem, we had several cases also where young women who of Chechen origin who were brought up in Europe were under false pretenses brought back to the North Caucasus at the age of 16, 17, 18, again under a false pretense to go to someone's wedding, for example, but in fact the plan was to ensure that they would be married off to someone against their will. And there was one woman from Sweden to whom this happened to, we were able to successfully evacuate, and then actually her relatives were prosecuted in Sweden for having sent her back. And actually there were a couple of cases from Norway as well. So this is a situation that we see happening still in the European Union.
Yes, thank you. We shall come back to these issues when we talk with Mina later on what is the situation here in Norway as well. But and to several other questions you have taken up. Now to you, Tamila. Now Vanessa has mentioned several individual cases of women from North Caucasus, and we know also that Evgeny Berkovich and Svetlana Petrychuk has made these also female political prisoners in Russia. They also have been persecuted for actually making a theater about the women who have been recruited or who were married with the Syrian people. Could you please tell us about why Human Rights Center Memorial, why it's important for you to talk about these women?
Sure. I would like to start with asking Alexandra, my colleague from OVD-Info, to pass around leaflets we have prepared within our team at Memorial. This list encompasses more or less top 10 human rights NGOs dealing with women's issues in Russian Federation. Those would include domestic violence, sexual violence, helping the survivors, issues of single mothers and mothers with children in difficult situations, the Northern Caucasus being a separate region with religious and traditional issues there, and of course also a list of several organizations that help other vulnerable people such as LGBTQ people, homeless, people suffering from torture and violence performed by law enforcement agents, etc. So there you'll find the websites, the contacts, and if you find yourself in need to learn more, I have listed my email at the bottom of the leaflet, so please contact me if you feel you need to learn more about any of these organizations or make contact with any of them. So sitting today between Vanessa and Elena, my learned colleagues who will present their expertise on North Caucasus and political prisoners, I would like to share with you the story of one memorial's client, a woman who is both suffering from the practices at the region of North Caucasus, who is currently a political prisoner for the second time, and who for the last 10 years of her life suffered through numerous issues, including sexual slavery, trafficking, and abusive practices of two authoritarian regimes in two states. So this is a story of Leyla Gatagajeva, a woman younger than most of us here today, born in 2001. At the age of 13, she was forced to move to Iraq by her mother and uncle, together with her siblings, where her uncle joined ISIS, the globally infamous terrorist organization. Her grandmother speaks about that decision like this. When the Ingushetian police, and Ingushetia is a region in Russia where Leyla is from originally, when Ingushetian police showed me a photo of my son, bearded, wearing numerous arms, I was in utter shock. The investigation told me he had joined the ISIS. Several months later, Leyla's uncle died, but at the same time, at the age of 13, she was forced by her family, coerced to enter into a marriage with another ISIS member, a soldier within the group in Iraq. There, she was coerced to commit to domestic duties such as clean, cook, do laundry, and of course, childbear. At the age of 14, she gave birth to her first child. At the age of 15, her second. In 2017, when Leyla was near 16 years old, but with two children already, her husband was killed in the battlefield of ISIS. Leyla was left with two children. Her family has also been killed. Her elder sibling was killed. Her uncle was killed, and her mother-in-law imprisoned for 15 years for allegedly assisting ISIS. She decided to voluntarily turn herself to the authorities of Iraq with a request to be deported to Russia, her home country, where she still had a loving grandma and other relatives who could help her out, being in poverty and starvation with two minor children, and herself still being a minor. Instead, Iraqi authorities decided to open up a case against her, as the same one as against her mother-in-law, to be an assist, the accusation of being an assist to the ISIS, of participating in the activities of a terrorist group. She was arrested, imprisoned for, and served a prison term of 5 years in Iraqi prison. Initially, her children had to be placed into the prison cell with her. They slept on the ground concrete floor. They barely had any food. It was the conditions were inhumane, but due to the non-stop attempts of Ingushetia. The grandmother, managed to get the children out. She requested for them to be listed on this official list for extradition of the children forcibly deported to Iraq and Syria. In 2019, children of Leila managed to be returned to Russia, Ingushetia, and grandma of Leila continued to take care of them, but Leila served her entire term in prison in Iraq. In 2023, that term ended, and she was immediately moved to another prison, this time a migration prison. At the same time, while she was serving the term, Russia decided to open pretty much the same case against Leila Gatagajeva in 2019. At first, she was charged with Article 2005.5, which means participation in the activities of a terrorist organization. Pretty much same case, same grounds. She was charged with that. In 2021, she was put on the list of international list of wanted persons. So when she left the regular Iraqi prison, she was imprisoned to be extradited to Russia. She was extradited from Baghdad to Ingushetia and was immediately arrested again. Later, the Russian investigation added another charge against Leila. That was Article 2008, which is participation in the activities of a forbidden armed group. When our colleagues, the attorneys on the ground in Ingushetia, as well as Memorial Human Rights Defense Center itself, learned about this case, we immediately stepped in and started actively fighting it. We managed to get rid of the first charge, the terrorist group charge, on the grounds that in all international treaties, in all constitutions, including Russian one, it is specifically listed that a person cannot serve punishment for the same activity twice. So we managed to get the verdict of the Iraqi court. We managed to get it translated from Arabic to Russian. We presented it to the investigation, and they dropped the first charge. The second charge, which is pretty much built on the same grounds and covers the same activity, stayed. So since 2023, since her extradition, Leila has been detained. At first, they placed her under house arrest as a minor and as a mother of two, but then they arbitrarily changed the pre-trial measure and placed her under regular arrest in pre-trial prison. Again, our team of attorneys on the ground and in various offices tried to fight it, but to no luck to this day. To this day, Leila is imprisoned in the pre-trial prison awaiting trial. The investigation has now been lasting for more than 4 years, since around 2020, considering both charges, and it still hasn't concluded, which of course, I'm not even going to go to this, but of course violates all principles of effective and prompt investigation. So at the moment, Leila is imprisoned. She has already testified to being coerced by the authorities to testify against other alleged members of the ISIS. She has been kidnapped once in 2023 from the pre-trial prison and brought with a bag covering her head to some unknown building allegedly connected with the law enforcement to be coerced into testifying against others. Moreover, once the authorities, the law investigation, brought her grandmother together with her children before her eyes and coerced and used illegal investigation methods towards them to coerce her into confession against other alleged members of the ISIS. There is no happy end to this story yet. We hope we will fight this in court as soon as it goes to trial, but at the moment, Leila is under the pre-trial arrest. The submission on her entire story of various abuses of her human rights was submitted this summer to the Special Rapporteur on the situation with human rights in Russian Federation, this special procedure within the United Nations, where we listed that, among other things, Leila was subjected to slavery, including sexual slavery, trafficking in persons, arbitrary detention, and of course violence against girls and women as a general issue here. So this is just one extremely horrifying and unfair example of a girl who had to suffer an enormous amount of abuses since the age of 13 to this day when she's 23 and already has been stripped from her 2 children for more than 5 years. On this rather sad note, I will conclude my story and will pass the floor to Elena.
Yes, yes.
First.
Thank you. It's a really sad story. Do you know how many similar cases are there with the similar, when young girls are being married to Syrian and then was treated like that?
So you mentioned in your introductory speech the play by Zhenya Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk. This is exactly the play about women like that. The women who are involuntarily are being married off to various armed fighters in organizations, terrorist groups like ISIS, but also a number of others. We at Memorial dealt so many times with various women being sent off to Syria, to Iraq, to Turkey to be married off to these men, and at so many occasions when they come back home, they try to escape the criminal charges. For instance, there is a special note in the Article 2005, the one on activity on participating in terrorist organization, that states that if you have committed this for the first time and you have quit the terrorist organization voluntarily and you have yourself turned yourself to the Russian authorities before they snatched you up, you have to be relieved of criminal responsibility. You will be relieved of serving the term. However, in so many occasions, Russian courts avoid that note. For instance, the popular thing in recent court verdicts is now that women like that or men like that who submitted themselves to the authorities should not have simply testified orally before investigation, but should have written some sort of affidavit on detailing their participation, naming other people, etc., signing this document, that affidavit form,
But
and submitting it.
yes, but we're talking about women mostly from North Caucasus or from whole Russia?
Mostly from Northern Caucasus, but there were cases of other women who were somehow influenced into such marriages. There is also like a famous case of a Moscow State University student who was born and raised in Moscow, somehow persuaded through communication in the internet to get married to a man within ISIS group, and she did that, and it was another huge operation to get her rescued.
Thank you so much. Yes, I started to ask questions because there's many questions, and I also want to encourage you and those who watch us to send us questions. If you have any, I will collect them by the end a bit later. And now moving to Elena. Again, now I would like to again repeat the cases of Zhenya and Svetlana Petrichuk, Zhenya Berkovich and Svetlana Petrichuk, who has actually made this wrote a story about this type, these cases of which Tamil have been talking about, and now they're imprisoned. And OVD-Info I've been working for many years, and now you have your exhibition. Could you please tell us about your how the situation for female women political prisoners inside Russia?
Thank you so much. Yeah, my presentation will be about women and prison and their suffering in prison. But I want to start with a more broad picture. OVD-Info was monitoring cases of political prosecution since 2012. And we actually count cases not of political prisoners, but of people who've been criminally prosecuted on political motives. So we may not agree with people with their position, with their values, with what they do, but we still count them. So this is another another perspective, and everything I will be talking will be about politically prosecuted, not only political prisoners. And I was thinking what to start my presentation with, and I asked colleagues to collect information on the dynamics of sex distribution or gender distribution in the whole number of not political prisoners, politically prosecuted people, and also sex distribution in the whole amount of those who are imprisoned. And I think there is an interesting trend. So yeah, the whole amount of people who've been prosecuted since 2012, since the time we started monitoring, is about 4,643, but there are more people. We cannot count them. This is just a small amount. And the share of women was increasing since at least 2015. For example, I will name some figures. In 2015, there was 5% of women. It was 6% next year 5%. In 2018, it was 16%. Again, in 2021, it was 17%. And in 2022, the full-scale invasion in Ukraine occurred. It was 90%, and the next 2 years it was 12%, 20. Sorry. Yeah, and the same picture is with the number of imprisoned. It also increased, and a little bit more dramatic. Big picture shows us in 2015 it was 5%. Then it was even less. Some years in 2021 it was 6%. In 2022 it was 9%, and again it was also 9% in the next 2 years. So yeah, what does it say? It say that for some reason after the war, maybe a little bit before, but especially after the war, authorities, they for some reason they turned tougher on prosecuting women. And you may heard, for example, such an opinion that women are treated indulgently by authorities because of the patriarchy system and things like that. But it appears to me not like that, at least now. And we may not say that women are treated indulgently. And especially in detention, women face both, let's say, gender-neutral violence, and they also face gender-based violence. So I think I have not much time, but I will just briefly describe what those violence and problems may be. And as to gender-neutral things, there are a lot of cases of solitary confinement. The case of Maria Ponomarenko you will see from our exhibition. She was placed 7 times. A lot of women, Lyudmila Razumova was also placed a lot of times for being just not like others, for just minor violations of the prison rules. What are other things? Physical, psychological abuse still exists. Forced treatment, rare cases, but still the case of Maria Ponomarenko, and of course poor conditions of detention themselves. What may be gender-based problems? A lot of problems related to hygiene. For example, the lack of menstrual products, showering once a week. This all is not enough when you a woman and you are in detention. Work compulsion, which is more severe than men's prisons, and women's physiology is not taken into account. Sometimes you may feel bad, you may menstruate, also. And you still have to work a lot of hours per day. Different humiliating undressing situations, open toilets, probably in the most of the colonies and pretrial detention centers. For example, breakdown of family ties. Women are being separated from their children, and also Memorial Political Prisoner Support Project, they reported that women are less often visited by their relatives. So this is just, again, a small amount of the issues that affect women badly in detention. In such circumstances, of course, women, they are getting many health issues, health diseases that are not treated well enough in all of the institutions. That's a common problem, of course, again, not only for women. We know at least 140 people imprisoned for political motives who have different health issues, and 15 of them, at least 15 of them, are women. There will be a moment of solidarity, but it just would be good to name them all. Данилович Ирина, Валерия Зотова, Антонина Зимина, Людмила Разумова, Анна Сафронова, Анна Александровна, Анна Архипова, Евгения Майборода, Ольга Комлева, Зарема Мусаева, Надежда Росинская, Лариса Барагунова, Елена Попова, Ольга Кузьмина, Anna Bajutova. These are women that are in detention and that have some health issues that are not treated enough. And here we have just 6 women with the same problems. You may after our discussion, you may come and we need to get rid of the chairs. But please come and scan the QR code, and you may listen the audio guides to the posters. They're very interesting, I promise. Yeah, and I wanted to finish with a call to action. I think and I believe that we should get even more attention to those who need our help. Because this may help them. And we have 2 cases, they're cases of men imprisoned, but I still believe they are relevant, so I can name them. The case of Igor Baryshnikov and Evgeny Bestuzhev. The attention really helped them, and we can trace the influence of advocacy and things of support. For example, in Igor's case, he was treated, he got the operation right after the United Nations Committee, Human Rights Committee, ordered interim measures. And after that, right after that, he was treated. So yeah, they need our attention, and we need not to forget them. All the time we need to do something to tell the authorities that we will be watching them, so get rid of them, like that. And recently I saw a very beautiful and inspiring campaign, 120 campaign. They are trying to highlight especially the cases of those who have health issues. So I think that things like that we really need, and we really need to support.
Thank you so much. I have just a very quick question. The imprisoned women, there are some specific colonies for women in Russia, right? You know how many are there, and do you know how because we also remember the since Pussy Riot, Nadezhda Tolkonikova was in Mordovia colony, for example. We remember that severe treatment of women. We see the continuation like that. Do you know that the number is expanding inside these colonies?
I don't know exact number of them, but they are much less of these colonies than the whole number of institutions. I guess there are no more than 100 in hundreds of the institution in general. So yeah, the small amount of them dedicated to women.
Thank you so much. We come back to questions. Now I think we will start our conversation, and I will start with talking to Mina. For you, Mina, the issues we're talking about now, and it's nothing is new, unfortunately, but what are your reflections? I mean, how can you, what can we in the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, what can we do, and what are we doing with these kind of issues?
Thank you, Ina. I think what strikes me first from hearing what you're talking about is something you mentioned, Vanessa, when Ina was talking about this report, which is a report based on available court documents, and by this people have made a report like trying to untangle the facts about the situation for a very large social group, namely women. It's not a few people we're talking about, and it also has to do with the topics that you guys are mentioning. And this is that a lot of the work that we're doing in the human rights movement in general and women's movement is to try to establish facts to justify and to say that we have a problem. And this is a process that comes somewhat later than in many other segments of the human rights movement, is that we sort of, in a little bit of a belated manner, come in afterwards and say this is also a problem, and we don't necessarily have the tools and the contexts that we need to prove that something has happened. And I think this report in itself, and also the work that all of you guys are doing, is really a proof of why civil society is such an indispensable actor in working to fight gender-based violence, is because we do collect the information, we systemize it, we try to find ways of using available instruments to prove that there is a human rights violation happening. I want to mention another example which is not connected to Russia, but which is was very significant for me when I started working in the human rights sector, and this is what happened after the war in Bosnia-Herzegovina, where we know that there was between 60,000 and 80,000 instances of rape, and this was like a case which is very typically used to prove how sexual violence is used as a weapon of war. But we didn't have the international tools necessary at that time to really prosecute based on this, and it took so much effort by local human rights activists, supported by international community, also to systemize information about what happened and actually instrumentalize it into being a legislation where, for example, women who are victims of war, victims of rape, got veteran status, so that they got, for example, access to remedies that allow them to live more comfortably than they would otherwise, for example. I think this way of working to constantly try to bring human rights abuses out from sort of the private sphere, out of the family, out of the prison cell, out of places where there's no oversight, and into the public eye, is extremely important part of the work that we're doing. And then also what is scary at this time is exactly that this is what is being attacked. So Berit mentioned in her introduction this backlash against women's rights, against gender, people working on gender-based violence on an international level, is that you see politicians trying to push it back into this private sphere and introducing legislation providing an alternative story about what gender-based violence is about, that it's part of some idea of traditional family values, for example, which is language that is now being pushed on UN level. And this is also the case with the Istanbul Convention, which is one of our most important international instruments for fighting gender-based violence and domestic violence. So while we are still trying to get all the facts into the light, people are starting to push back to get the little international recognition that we have gained, or not little, but at least quite new. So that we're sort of stuck in between. We need to continue to work to make sure that we sort of gain more territory than people are taking away from us. And I think the work that is being done in the human rights movement with both monitoring, documenting, and systemizing this information is some of the most important things that can be done, because we continue to produce, or you continue to produce, the facts that will make it impossible to take away those instruments that are available because people push them in there.
Yes, and what the question will be then, I want to go back to what, to this state ownership of the rights and individual rights, So, and I would like to now open the floor for our own, for our conversation, and maybe talk about when, we have been working again for many years, and this issue of traditional values and the role of women, which will born children and have a kind of traditional way of behaving from one side. From another side, we also see that the grown number of abuses against women, and as again back to this report, it says that in the world there has been 89,000 women killed only in 2022. It's a quite a big number. What is going on? I thought maybe it's, well, again, when we focus on Russia, it's we see this backlash, and we will get back to the war and how the war now influence also for the situation in for women's rights inside Russia. But can you just have a kind of comment on that as well? What is, what kind of international mechanisms are there to protect women? I mean, when we at the same time see the growing number of the cases.
I think that we do not have enough mechanisms. We are in process of establishing frameworks that let us use the existing general mechanisms. I think it's difficult to start listing up available mechanisms, but I think one thing which is frightening about the statistic that we see is that we keep working and the abuse keeps happening. So the question here is a little bit, how come with all these efforts, why are the statistics in some cases rising? It's more logical maybe that it rises in situations where there's conflict and war, for example. But why, for example, do we not see in a context like the Norwegian one, for example, that the statistics is improving? So it's a very broad field, but I still think it speaks to the necessity of constantly paying attention to it, trying to unpack what is actually happening, what are the root causes, what can be done. We are still in the phase where we need to understand what is happening and what is the right remedies.
Thank you. Any questions? I will, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you for your thank you for your really interesting presentations. My name is Patricia Kate. I'm from Amnesty International in Norway. My question is to you. In Amnesty Norway, we are having a particular focus on the situation of Maria Ponomarenko, who has been at least 7 times put in an isolation cell, despite the fact that she has claustrophobia. This is, of course, also increasing her mental health challenges and other health challenges. My question to you is, do you see a general increase in the use of violence against female inmates? That is my first question. You were talking about an increase in the general level of women political prisoners and women being indicted on political grounds, but do you see an increase in the violence that they are exposed to during imprisonment? Is my first question. My second question is, do you have an oversight of any of you, an oversight over the number of girls under 18 who are in pre-trial detention? We have, as Amnesty, previously been focusing on the situation for children in prison, so we are particularly concerned about the situation of girls in prison. So girls in pre-trial detention, is there any oversight, any number? Thank you.
Thank you. So, yes, who will start?
I may start talking about Maria Ponomarenko. You are also right. She was placed 7 times for minor, even mistakes, but for things she even didn't do. I cannot say that there is some violence from the inmates in women's prisons. Maybe just the opposite. Women's mostly they are more there less violence from among the prisoners themselves, not like in men's prisons. There is no hierarchy and bullying, but no bullying, of course. It exists pretty much in a huge scale. But what is threatening to Maria is not this violence from other prisoners, but from the authorities. I think they are even bullying her for being just disobedient, for being just again not like others, and this is what we priorly tackle in the case. So yeah, I probably don't know how to answer your question because I'm not aware of this violence against her in this particular case. So yeah, but it doesn't mean that we shouldn't support her, because the violence is massive from the authorities themselves.
And
This
also
is my
there was a question about minor prisoners. If you have any numbers.
Maybe a little bit after the answers of others, because yeah,
Okay.
I may have it, but maybe I need to prepare and to find it if it's possible.
Do you have any? Yeah.
I will add a little bit to both questions. First of all, I wouldn't know if there is a particular rise in prison torture against females, but there is definitely an uprising that's been noted this year, maybe and also previous year, in using in-prison methods of isolation, such as arbitrary placing of political prisoners into places such as, well, in Russian language, those would be shizo, which is basically, yes, isolation cell, incarceration in isolation. Also, YPKT and PKT, which are also like separate barracks, separate from the main prison buildings. And also there's a lot of arbitrary placement into the more severe conditions of imprisonment. So like severe or which is severe conditions or severe regime. So basically, when the accused lands in prison, he is put on the regular regime. If he behaves last counted since 9/11. The number of minors on that list being monitored by WASP in monitoring service was 79. Among those are three children being born in 2009, 16 of 2008, 34 of 2007, and 49 of 2006. And the total number is 79 minors.
I may only add that right now the number of minors politically prosecuted, again, I want to stress that these are not political prisoners, 12, and 6 are in detention. Just some of them: Егор Балазейкин, Любовь Лизунова, Валерия Зайцева, Валерий Зайцев, простите, sorry. Yeah, so 12 are prosecuted right now.
Okay, the question to you, Vanessa. Now Russia is out of European Court of Human Rights, no international, well, we talk about UN, of course, but with your experience working inside Russia, what are the mechanisms left inside Russia now when women experience abuses? Can they expect any kind of help? I mean, if we differentiate between state authorities and civil society groups.
Yeah, indeed, there are many fewer mechanisms that, well, anyone can use, victims of human rights violations in Russia. I mean, I think that civil society now, I mean, also to give sort of the even broader context, it was, litigation on domestic violence and some of the other issues that we talked about was a pretty new strategy, I think, for many women's rights organizations in Russia, even until fairly recently. So it wasn't, the first case that was litigated on domestic violence at the European Court of Human Rights, for example, was decided in 2019, and there were thousands of judgments against Russia, and civil society had developed huge litigation practices on many other kinds of human rights violations, except for violence against women, even though that had been a systemic problem ever since it had started to be studied. So I think now civil society is falling back on some of their old practices. They still use the Russian court system. Some of the cases that I mentioned, for example, in Chechnya on the right to family life, there are still cases being litigated. It is not always, but still possible sometimes, for example, to enforce a judgment on custody rights. I know that now civil society is also making use of UN mechanisms, making more use of UN special rapporteur procedures. Of course, those are much more slower moving, I would say, and don't necessarily have an impact. I mean, I think also a point that was mentioned, I think by Mina, that so often it's really about changing attitudes too. It's about bringing abuses to light, and that's so much of what changed public opinion in Russia, about what made it possible to bring the idea of it's not a private violation, it is actually an abuse of human rights, and bring that into the public understanding. And now there is no independent media in Russia, the independent media that there is all outside the country and reaches fewer and fewer people. So I think a lot of what civil society needs now also is, still more attention being paid to these cases outside the country, more publications, and, putting pressure on the government that way as well, because there is still a little bit of, some impact that can be had from sort of the bad publicity, I think, because there's just not enough attention now in the country on like all the newspapers and media outlets that used to write consistently on domestic violence and were clearly supporting, for example, like the passage of a law. Now they're completely state controlled, and there's no way that you can get that message across.
Well, from our point of view, from Norwegian Helsinki Committee point of view as well, we have been working with civil society groups inside Russia and cooperating with many of them. And it's really, from the positive side, it's quite many organizations have been working with the raising awareness about the situation of women in the North Caucasus. And this report, which we already cited, also the result of the work of several organizations working together. And this is the positive side. At the same time, it's let's talk about the impact of the war, because we know that now the situation even worse, because we see that those who have been in the war, and from one point of view, many of them are criminals from the first part, and maybe several of them have been actually judged for gender-based violence, and then when they are being pardoned just because they want to go, or they sign the contract with the Russian military services and then get back and they're free men and repeat this criminal the violence again. So this is a huge problem, and of course, as you said, that it's still possible, but still getting to be more and more difficult, that this report also stays. So, Mina, what can we do that? I mean, knowing that, collecting this information, you already talked about documentation, but concrete. We know that also in Norway it's quite a problematic for us, both with asylum procedure and visa, and what can we do?
Yeah, I think what we can do is to support local efforts and to continue to support local efforts when sort of that when this light bulbs go off, and to remain a steady partner for civil society in Russia. But this is a very typical standard answer. Like you support local efforts. I still think we should do more than to support local efforts, because there's a need to also take part of the fight ourselves. That has to do with both going to making sure that this point stays on the international agenda. It's impossible for civil society in Russia both to do everything that happens at home and at the same time sort of being accountable to the international society. So it's really important that we take our share of the load and to continue to work to hold Russian authorities accountable, of course, or any other nation who is not complying with their obligations. In a Norwegian context, I think there's very specific things that we can do related to pushing our government to putting mechanisms in place that will make it safer to be a human rights defender from Russia. That means providing visas that will allow people to go in and out, to continue their work with some limited, at least as much safety as possible. I think specifically when it comes to this issue of gender-based violence, I think there's also more things that can be done. We have seen in a Norwegian context, we have a legislation which allows people who are experiencing domestic violence while they are in the asylum process to get an expedite asylum procedure, or also to be treated independently of their spouse, for example. I think these mechanisms are quite significant, and you also mentioned these cases with where young I will actually not say women, because we have seen it both with men, both with boys and girls who have been sent to their country of origin and being kept there for forced marriages or other harmful practices. The Norwegian statistics, they monitor this quite well. Like, where are the cases from what countries, where are people being sent, and there's very clear statistics on this, where Russia is the fifth country on the list, which is quite significant. It means that a lot of cases of people being sent back to harmful practices, this is happening to Russia. The other countries are Syria, Somalia, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. So I think we have a lot to do to do our share of the work and to support local effort. It can be much more than just the buzzword of supporting local effort. and a lot has to do also with the following up on national policies.
Thank you. And also when we talk about now, we should also have a look to the future. I must also say that when I started in the Norwegian Health Committee again back in 2005, almost 20 years ago, the specter of civil society groups in terms of the age and generation has been changed, really. And I'm very happy to see that the civil society groups, human rights defenders, and working on the situation side as former Soviet republics also have been changing. We also see now our panel is consisting of women. That's also very quite positive. And when you look ahead, of course we, again, knowing about the continuation of the war, and this is not the first war, we already talked about the war in Chechnya, and we see that it will be just even more, perhaps, and we need to prepare how traumatic the trauma of the whole situation ahead. So could you please, each of you, tell what is your hope for the future and what should we do, all of us, both inside and outside of Russia, and what would your ultimate goal will be in terms of situation for women? Maybe start with Tamila.
Wow. Shifting a little bit from the gender-based violence perspective to a more global one, I am an absolute believer that all violations of rights of various vulnerable groups are the result of current regime, namely Putin's regime, also deeply affected by the war he has, by the full-scale invasion he has launched in Ukraine. This regime is threatening everything and everyone. Just yesterday, we learned that the parliament introduced a new bill, which is named Protection of the Health of a Child Before Its Birth, which in its intrinsic words pretty much means abortion ban in the upcoming future. If I may say so, celebrated an anniversary of the blanket LGBT ban by the Supreme Court of Russian Federation in last November, and at Memorial this already did by preparing a full many pages report about all the homophobic practices of Russian authorities since the 90s to 2024. We started with, sort of like, as they said, protecting children from propaganda to, imprisoning people for wearing rainbow symbolica or voting at LGBT club or something like that, literal imprisonment. This regime is pretending to champion traditional values, but at the same time it's ruining them. It's ruining the rights of families. It's ruining the families. I mean, again, coming back to Zhenya Berkovich and Svetlana Petrychuk, Zhenya Berkovich is not only a mother, she is a mother of several adopted kids. And that was mentioned by her attorneys when they were basically begging the court to place her under house arrest, at least, for the pre-trial format. That was denied. Is that the country that champions traditional values? I do not think so. So we at Memorial, we do not focus on any particular issues. As you may see from your leaflet, there are organizations dealing just with torture or just with LGBT or just with female issues or with particular regions. We try to dab into everything and to advocate this on international level because we strongly believe that all of these abuses growing deeper and deeper are tied to the current regime, and dismantling of this regime and dismantling of this corrupt judiciary and corrupt investigation and law enforcement services is the ultimate goal to, make the life of all vulnerable groups in Russia and surrounding Russia and neighboring Russia better in the future.
Thank you. And there was also this, there have been several legislation to control women have been adopted for now recent months on child free and so on. So very getting more and more absurd. Yeah, yeah.
Feminist ban, feminist movement ban, for prohibition to do abortions in the private medical institutions, only 6 ones, which also have to persuade a woman to not do so for a mandatory amount of time before they can actually go on with the procedure.
Yeah. So we're getting more and more in the archaic world. So how shall we get it out from that, Elin?
I think we should mention many things. You know, in my presentation I noted that there is a common belief that women are treated differently. Think that no matter what, of course I dream without political repression and prisons being a better place to change people, not to punish them. But I also think that we should change in some kind, and we should acknowledge, know, and tackle the gender-based violence in many spheres in our life, private life, and now in detention and in society in general. We should do that.
Yes, we should be human. Vanessa?
I would wish that the women's movement in Russia can stay and become more connected to the international women's rights movement, because you know, there's an international movement that we see cross-border to restrict women's rights in a range of areas. It's not just Russia. It's happening in the United States. It's happening in Ukraine. You mentioned the war. There's a huge spike in domestic violence in Ukraine as well. And there's so many ways that I think Russian women human rights defenders can contribute to, hopefully at some point very soon, a lasting peace in Ukraine, but also can contribute so much to the international movement for women's rights. And so I think one of the biggest threats they face is isolation. And so again, that's related to mobility, to human rights defender mobility, but then also some of the other measures that you mentioned in terms of, you know, asylum policies, etc. And also in uplifting women's role in securing peace, right? I mean, there is sort of a recognized role for women enshrined in the various UN resolutions, but it's so often not put into practice. And so, in terms of pushing for the peace that we all desperately need in the region, to see women at the forefront of that.
Yeah, that's inshallah, I would say, but yeah. Mina, we already been talking about what we do, what we should do, what Norway should do, and we in Norwegian Health Committee actually committed, and what Vanessa just said, that to implement and bring the situation locally, more internationally, and in terms of gender questions, it's one of the, well, I would say maybe priorities also as well in our work. So what do you think? I mean, can you also kind of have your final words about your hopes?
Yeah, I think I would echo what was recently said here, that this marginalization and isolation of the voices from within Russia and organizations working on these issues in Russia is really dangerous. We need more platforms to get all the facts on the table, to have the discussions we're having here, but with a far larger audience, so that these facts can be put into action, and also push against this backlash claiming that equality has gone too far, and all of these narratives which are extremely detrimental to all of us. So I think this would be my short-term hope, is that we manage to keep this conversation going and to get all this really important documentation that is being done currently have an effect, and we will of course do our part in this.
Thank you. We have no question, as I see. I would like we have a couple of minutes. I would like to encourage you to buy our calendars, which is on the back side. It's a perfect. These are perfect Christmas presents for those who are here. Otherwise, also you can also have it on our see it on our website. I also would like to announce that there will be next week we will have Sasha Skachelenka visiting Oslo. Sasha was also a political prisoner. She was a part of this big exchange, and there will be an action. We are co-organizing exhibition, a brainwashing machine, which is also opening this weekend. I also would like to welcome you there. It is on the 7th of December. You can also find the information on our website. It is on our website, yes. I don't remember the address. You can find it on our website. So, yeah, and we will also write letters to political prisoners on the 13th of December, together with Sasha Skachelenka and Alexandra, who is sitting back here. She will be leading this action as well. So, and here I would like to thank all of you to come, and I'm very glad that we finally made it. So, thank you very much for your your thoughts and sharing with us your experiences as well. And of course, we will continue our work. And yeah, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. May I also
thank you
add,
so much.
don't forget to come and see the exhibition. That's the way to prepare yourself for the writing letters.
So the address for the exhibition is Freden Borgveien 22.